My presentation is on Turkey's EU accession, and I analyzed a couple. We'll begin by looking at the history of Turkey and the EU, because it's a little more extensive than you might think it would be. And then I'm going to go into a couple of the official reasons that the EU has cited for not allowing Turkey in, a couple of the unofficial reasons, which are touched on in a couple of other presentations, and then finally, what is the status quo? What are my conclusions? So, to begin with, a brief history of Turkey's EU bid. They actually petitioned for associate membership in 1959, which was very, very soon in the process. And in 1963, the EU actually signed an agreement with Turkey called the Ankara Agreement. And the that agreement did two things. The first was, it said, hey, you have a member, or you have a role, Turkey, in future EU integration. We don't know what that role is. The document didn't say that, but it said, Turkey, you are supposed to participate. And the second thing is that the document actually used language that would lead Turkey to believe that it would be in the EU at some point in time. And so there's a lull in EU-Turkey integration movements. And then in 1987, Turkey, the European Parliament and the European Commission, who both advised Turkey not to apply for EU membership, went ahead and applied for full membership. Application didn't go anywhere. It was held. It wasn't even opened. And then in 1997, the EU acquiesced and finally allowed Turkey into the customs union. As we'll see in a little bit, they're in the customs union. It's not full integration into the customs union, but it's pretty close. They do have access to the EU markets at a much greater rate than other countries would. In 2005, official accession talks were finally opened with Turkey. That was a negotiations framework document, and that opened up the first of the 35 chapters of the Acquis Communautaire. The EU has given two major official reasons for not allowing Turkey's accession at this point. As you'll see, it's not been a quick process relative to other countries. The first is what I call the Cyprus problem, which we'll talk about. And then the EU cites slow Turkish reform related to the Copenhagen criteria. The first one is probably the biggest issue, as you'll see in my conclusions, is the Cyprus problem. So what you see here is a map of Cyprus. And in 1974, Turkey bid what is that red area. And there was a Greek coup. Turkey didn't want Greece to have power over Cyprus, so it invaded, divided the country into two-thirds. The bottom two-thirds is what we call Cyprus, which is an EU member state, thus the complications. And at the top is the self-declared Northern Cyprus Republic of Turkey, or Turkish Republic of Cyprus, rather. And Turkey refuses to diplomatically recognize Cyprus, which is a big issue if you want to join the EU and it's an EU member state. And the EU has gone on record several times saying this. And another way, Cyprus refuses to engage in trade with Turkish Cyprus, which is the reason why it's a big issue going both ways. Trade can't go to the north, and Turkey calls this economic isolation by the EU. Both sides are refusing to budge, and this is probably the biggest issue to Turkey's accession. And Turkey does still have military troops in northern Cyprus. The second reason the EU gives is slow Turkish reform. There are a couple of issues here. The first is rule of law. For those of you not familiar with Turkey, they have a unique role for their military. Their military has undergone more than 4 or 5 coups, the most recent one being in 1997. They depose leaders and they consider themselves the guardians of the secular state. Turkey is very, very Islamic, but it's a very secular political state. And so the military will overthrow leaders if it sees them as too Muslim or moving too far towards Islamization. And that kind of worries the EU in regards to the Copenhagen criteria because they must guarantee rule of law. The second is protection of minorities. Turkey, again, has about 73 to 75 million people. Only about 100 to 200,000 of those are non-Muslims. So they have a very small minority population. And as recently as 2002 to 2003, there were laws that prevented minority religious organizations from acquiring property, selling that property, opening up new places of worship. And they did pass a new law in 2005 that was supposed to alleviate that, but it only went part of the way, according to the EU, into actually opening up the rest of the way for religious freedom, which is another one of the concerns. There are several unofficial reasons, though, that the EU has not gone on record as saying are issues, but are. A couple of these are cultural difference and fears of Islamization. This was talked about before. Several prominent EU leaders in 2004 and 2005, all the way to now, such as Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, the president of France, and Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, have gone on record as saying EU should have a privileged relationship with Turkey, but not a full membership. Sarkozy refuses it on principle, which I don't even know what that means. But a lot of people think it has to do with the first reason. The second reason is public perception of the benefits of Turkish EU membership. According to several Eurobarometer polls, of the general EU citizens perception of the benefit of Turkey joining is 40%, and that was like in 2003, I believe. Right now, it sits around 30%. And likewise, what's surprising is the Turkish public has responded in kind. That same poll measured Turkish approval of EU, the benefits of joining the EU, at around 70% in 2003. And right now, it's about 45%. So the Turkish public is responding in kind to what I would assume would be the arguments that are being made against Turkey joining the EU. And most of it coming from that first reason, at least in terms of public policy. The final reason is economics. And this was touched on briefly before, CAP. If Turkey joined CAP, it would be the largest benefactor of CAP in the EU by far. And so CAP would need to be restructured in order to accommodate that. And another big issue is the EU structural and cohesion funds. Turkey's GDP per capita is about 75% below the EU average, which means over 90% of the country is eligible to receive those funds. That is a huge drain of those funds, and they're not set up to allow that. And so right now, there have to be two major reforms to both CAP and the EU structural and cohesion funds in order to allow Turkey to accede to full membership. My conclusions are kind of cut off at the bottom, but my first is that Turkey is unlikely to be admitted as a full member anytime in the near future. The talks have been stalled for 5 years. They've only closed 2 chapters of the acquiesced Unitar, and they only opened up one new one last year, which is extremely slow. With that said, only one country, or no countries have entered the EU accession talks with the EU and not been admitted. But I think Turkey will be that first country that probably won't be admitted, at least for a while. The second conclusion is the Cyprus problem is the biggest issue of all the ones I've listed. Cyprus is a member state, and Cyprus did vote to allow the talks to Turkey to open up. It was a unanimous decision on the part of the EU, but they're the ones who blocked the opening of the first chapter in 2006, and eventually acquiesced and allowed it to be open. But Cyprus has had a big voice in this process. And finally, cultural and religious xenophobia are working against the session, and that will have to be more of a grassroots underlying type discussion if we're going to allow the average US citizen, or EU citizen rather, to approve of Turkey joining the EU.
Excellent.
Do you have any questions?
Okay. Well, we're going to hold all the questions until the end, and then we will. Well, actually, let's do it that way. Even though your topic is a little bit different than the other, so let's still